This is a Thompson Cast. I am Mel Thompson. There's nothing worse than a natural disaster to create political risk. And when I say that, I'm specifically talking about how the country experiencing the risk of a natural disaster handles it. How do they communicate with the outside world? Are they forthright on the issues and the elements that are potentially dangerous to overall trade and investment relationships? Or do they try to handle things internally and then wait till they spiral out of control and then ask for help after the situation has become very chronic? Now, let's hope for the best when we start talking about the Petroleum Safety Authority in Norway, which has said it is investigating a substantial leak at the Ula field in the North Sea. The Petroleum Safety Authority, also known as the PSA, said that the release occurred about a week ago, and there were no major issues with the infrastructure, but the investigation was launched mainly because of the severity of the leak. Now, you can't have oil leaking into the water, obviously. We all know this. And this seems a little bit suspect to me. There's no damage to the infrastructure, so how did the oil leak happen? That's my question. What are all of the issues? And how can you possibly identify this as a substantial long-term political risk without all this information? Well, the answer is very clear. If you don't have the information, and obviously a government body is not forthcoming, or it appears they're not coming 100%, then that is a substantial long-term political risk. Nothing that ever comes out of a government that is not completely transparent when it comes to issues surrounding a natural disaster is ever going to be a short-term risk. Something is not being told, and when it's not being told, you can't possibly react as a foreign direct investor. A lack of knowledge and uncertainty are the worst enemies any market can have. And this creates a lot of problems for me because it just doesn't seem that the information so far coming out of Norway has been 100% transparent. I'm not calling them liars. I'm just saying that there's not enough information to know exactly how this happened, and that's the number one thing. When you start talking about there's no damage to the infrastructure, yet there's an oil leak, it doesn't make any sense. And, of course, BP's involved with this, and they had no comment about the incident, and the company said it started production at an important phase at this oil field back in April, and they were trying to enhance the production. They were clearly moving quite rapidly to get it up, for about 10 or 20 years. And the other issue about the Ula field is that it came online in 1986, so it's been around for a while. It had a life expectancy of only 11 years. Now, that was 1986. Now, all of a sudden, it just appears to me that there's been a push to get it online for like another 10 to 20 years. And now there's this natural disaster, which no one can explain to any of us on the outside who may be shareholders in any of the vendors who did the work on the infrastructure for the field, or have some type of interest in any other ancillary business related specifically to production at the Ula field. People need to know these things. They're entitled to know. The political risk is the fact that either the PSA doesn't know all the facts because they're not being told themselves, and they have not pushed hard enough to get all the facts, or they are trying to make sure that they mitigate the overall damage it could cause the Norway government if somehow they miss something that was obvious and allows this thing to go forward. The red flag for me is the fact that this thing was only supposed to be around for 11 years. Now they're doubling the time it was going to be online, and all of a sudden this happens. I am not a oil industry analyst. I'm not an engineer. And the only contact I have with petroleum products when it comes to them in a form like this is pumping my own gas. But I will tell you, when you have people much smarter than I saying that this particular field should only bear fruit for 11 years. And then all of a sudden you have a company like BP who did not do well when it came to dealing with the leak in the Gulf a couple years ago, tell you they were looking to produce from the same field for another 10 to 20 years. And then all of a sudden something happens with no clear explanation. Something certainly is not right. Either BP is not being forthcoming with the officials in Norway, or the officials in Norway, as I said, missed something, and they're trying to nuance it in some way so they can save face. Now, I'm not begrudging either BP or the Norwegian government from saving face. I'm just saying that from a standpoint of a foreign direct investor, this uncertainty creates a huge political risk because the government of Norway is involved, and we're still not getting the proper information. And the proper information, in my mind, would also include why in the world was this project approved for another 10 to 20 years. Where is the documentation to show that this was a logical step and that this would not cause a long-term environmental problem? Those are the types of questions that can't be answered unless the Norwegian authorities come forward 100% and explain exactly the root and genesis of this particular problem, exactly what this is, how it happened, and let the foreign direct investors see all of the documentation from soup to nuts. And when I say soup to nuts, I mean stuff going all the way back to 1986. If you want to see it and you're putting money into either one of the vendors associated with the project or the project proper, you are entitled to see how this all played out. And then you can make a decision. Is this a long-term political risk because the government allowed this to go forward and didn't stop this, even though they knew there were problems, or is it a short-term risk where they looked at everything logically, which the documents bear out, and the risk outweighed the risk, and obviously the benefit would have outweighed the risk, yet in this particular case, something went catastrophically wrong, and it could never have been foreseen. If that's the case, then obviously that's a normal risk to a certain degree, and it's a short-term political risk. If it's the other way around, where they knew there were problems and should never have been done, that's a long-term political risk that you need to take into consideration anytime you deal with projects that require the Norwegian government's approval. What are they ignoring? It should be the only question going through your head as you see that the Norwegian government is involved with a project before you put money into it. I'm hoping that I am completely wrong about this and that this was just a blip on the radar and it is nowhere near as bad as it appears to be from the news reports that we have seen and that I have seen. But it just seems a little sketchy to me. But if anything, it gives you pause. It causes you to think very hard and ask a lot of questions going forward about every single country. Every single country, whether it's Norway or Peru or Russia or China, every country creates political risk in some way, for good or for bad. And you should always ask a lot of questions and get as much documentation as you can before you put any money into any project that requires any type of government contact. And they all require government contact. This has been the Thompson Cast. I am L. Thompson.